Good afternoon, everybody. I've been here for the last 5 to 10 minutes, so I'm a little stressed because neither am I a conductor and neither am I a salsa dancer. And I'm definitely not wearing a very shiny leotard. So I apologize, but I hope that by the end of the time that I am done, I can produce a few twinkles in your eyes. So let me start by what I'm going to be talking about today. It's leadership from the top of the bottom of the pyramid. And what this is really about is access and opportunity and creating a platform. A lot of us who are in this room have had great access, have had great opportunities, and have certainly had a great platform, starting from the families we were born into, the values that we've been given, and how that has helped chart our trajectories towards the leaders that we are today in whichever field we are. So if you look at this screen right now, you see a lot of names that you know. And I've compartmentalized them into these boxes. And these are leaders from all fields, from technology, from business, from politics, from cinema, across all different kinds of organizations. But what is the one thing which is extremely common about them? All these individuals, for each box, represent the schools that they come from. Not the universities, but the schools. For example, a Mark Zuckerberg, a Gore Vidal, and a George Plimpton went to the same school. And similarly for other boxes as well. What's even more fascinating is that most of these schools were private institutions, not necessarily public. They may or may not have come from affluent backgrounds, but they certainly came from backgrounds where their families appreciated and valued the power of education and what it can do to an individual at a very, very young age. So that's the United States. That's a global discussion. Let's come to India. Look at the names of these individuals. You have businessmen. You have a former prime minister. You have people in sports. You have people in the arts. You have journalists. You have ambassadors. What's most exciting and interesting about this particular slide is that all these people actually come from just one school in India. And I'm sure most of you know what school that is. So what is it that the school was able to do for these individuals at this very, very young stage, when they're age 7 or age 8, all the way till they're about 18? Inculcated a few values, inculcated a certain drive, and inculcated certain skills, a certain confidence, and of course, the level of education was very good. They also went to an extremely elite school, and some of them, of course, come from extremely affluent backgrounds. But what's even more important is that most of them actually represent urban India. Not so many of them actually come from rural India. So again, going back to what I had discussed before, this is a problem of access. And sometimes it's not about how rich or how poor you are, but it's where you are in the country that helps gain you that access. Let's talk about rural India. Let's talk about this photograph. So these are students from a village in a government school. So one of the things that I find particularly interesting when we talk about education in India is that most of the time we're talking about the problem of education and access. And very few times are we talking about the problem of leadership. So not to say that historically we haven't had leaders that have come out from rural India. There have been leaders who've come out from rural India. But it has been a fairly inorganic process. It isn't organic. And if we look at the difference between the urban-rural divide, it is a divide and a difference of access. Even underprivileged people that live in urban India have certain exposure and hence an ability to have a certain access. And of course, the 400 or 500 million people in our country that do live in urban and semi-urban areas do have access to elite academies, elite scholarships, and even the very best of what government institutions have to offer. If you go towards rural India, you have schools such as these. And what is to say that the girl in this photograph, or the boy at the back who's smiling, cannot be a leader of tomorrow? He or she can be, given the right platform, and more importantly, given the right access, to be able to compete with their urban counterpart. That's all that one is really trying to create, a level playing field. So we decided that why don't we try to focus on one of the most tough, I would not even say backward, but one of the most tough states of India, which is Uttar Pradesh, where we are right now. And we're in a fairly urban and a fairly elite part of Uttar Pradesh. But most of Uttar Pradesh is not such. Firstly, the population of our state, 200 million people. That would make it the 6th or the 7th largest country in the world. We don't even have to consider India. Then, there are 50 million children within the age group of 5 to 14, which means they're at the ripe school-going age. But how many of them actually end up going to school and having the kind of access that we have? But what's very interesting about the state of Uttar Pradesh is, despite all this, since independence, the state of Uttar Pradesh has produced 8 prime ministers of India. So it's inorganic. At the same time, there's something in the DNA. And that's what makes this state extremely interesting and fascinating and worth the challenge. So we decided to create an elite academy, a residential school, much like the examples that we had seen in the first 2 slides that I showed you. And it was called Vidyagyan. Now, as I've discussed before, the state is extremely big, not only in size, but in population. So how do you actually attack the state, for a lack of a better word? We decided to create 2 Vidyagyan Leadership Academies. And these are residential schools for children from grade 6 to grade 12, co-ed, boys as well as girls. But to be able to tackle the state of Uttar Pradesh, we decided to establish 2 campuses. One in Bulandshahr, which is western UP, and one in Sitapur, which is central UP, close to Lucknow. Each campus is about 30 acres, and truly, it is the kind of school that you and I would go to had it existed somewhere close to town or had our parents know about it. But it's really to provide access to the rural, underprivileged, but highly meritorious, so that tomorrow they can come out into the world and have a level playing field and an ability to compete with you and I. So where are we at Vidyagyan today? Between the 2 campuses, we have around 1,300 students, 930 alumni. As I mentioned, 2 residential campuses, 74 acres between the 2 campuses, which is very generous. It's probably one of the best that you have in schools, even for the urban milieu. And every single alumni that has graduated from Vidyagyan is in a university. Rewind back to the photograph that I showed you of those government children in a rural government school. Do you think that all the students that graduate from that school, would you have had 100% placement? And would all of them end up going to universities? Probably not. So how do you create an environment and really truly a facilitator to make sure that just like an urban school, it is not even a question that students are going to graduate out of class 12 and most of them are going to go to universities. Putting the same conditions for the Vidyagyan Rural Leadership Academy and saying that 100% have to go to university, much like the trajectory that urban students have. And we have 12 students who've actually managed to, on merit, with 100% scholarship, place themselves in some of the top universities in the US. So it's a great source of confidence and validation that I don't have an answer. I don't know if they're going to be leaders 10 years from now, 12 years from now, even 6 or 7 years from now. But are they on the right trajectory? Have we put them onto a path, much like a lot of the people in this room? Yes. And could they tomorrow become leaders in the different fields that they choose to? Perhaps. It's a very, very big possibility. So how do we get there? So I often get asked about the admissions process. When Vidyagyan was started, and that was the first year in 2009, we had 10,000 applications, because I think within the state, as well as the government, people were quite surprised that a model like this was being presented for the first time. And a lot of the questions we got were why? Why are you doing this? And what is the catch? And truly, what we were trying to do at that point was to say that it's a social experiment. It's been done with schools in India and of course abroad with urban populations. So why can't we not try this with 70% of India, which actually still lives in rural India, and hence go towards Uttar Pradesh? Fast forward now to today. This year, we had 250 applications. 10,000 in the first year, 250,000 applications this year. And what is the eligibility criteria? They should be residents of Uttar Pradesh, annual incomes of rupees 1 lakh and below, and they should be studying in class 5 in a rural school. And the rural school could be a government school, or it could be a private school in your village. And from 250,000, we do a big test. We narrow down the number to 2,500. We do a second test and we choose 200. So look at the acceptance ratio, 0.08. It's probably the toughest acceptance ratio in the world for any institution, including the IIT, since we talk about it so much in India. And a lot of interesting learnings and observations have taken place in the last 9 years. Something really amusing, that if you go on Amazon now and you type Vidyagyan, all of a sudden in rural UP, you have people who started doing Vidyagyan coaching, which is really funny. And then you've got, people who are actually producing Vidyagyan entrance test books. These are not validated by us at all, and we don't even encourage this. But what I'm saying is that a certain ripple effect has gotten created. So even though after an extensive search process and examination process, the Vidyagyan Rural Academies only take about 200 students, there are lots of more aspirants who've already got onto a certain trajectory and a path. Their hunger has been awakened. So even if they don't make it to a Vidyagyan, the fact that they've been through this process, chances are they would be pushing their families to say, I still want to go to a better school. I still want to have a better platform. And that's what you need to provide me, and that's what I would need to fight for. So, one of the things with Vidyagyan is it's not just creating a competitive spirit, but when it comes to competing in this world, it's really creating a combative spirit. So there's a big difference between the two. And the idea of Vidyagyan is, even though that every year we only take in 200 scholars, we're able to create a combative spirit, which would make a larger population aspire and much more driven. So, this is where I'm going to end. What did the IITs do for India when the IIT started? Even today, there are only those many thousands of seats that get filled, but the number of millions that aspire to go to an IIT. And we're talking about higher education. With Vidyagyan, one is looking at a couple of hundred seats in the state of Uttar Pradesh, where there are millions of students. But again, trying to create these spirals of aspiration so that tomorrow, at least someone from the top of the bottom of the pyramid, in a much more organic manner, can be the future Prime Minister or Nobel laureate for India. Thank you.